Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, mein Damen and Herren, senors and senoritas, comic book fans the world over, it's time for Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living, strangely enough, is I write comic books. Let's get right to it. Ace Mowick, you've given your opinion on DC's Gun PSA comic, Batman Seduction of the Gun. Do you have any similar perspective to their Landmine PSA, Superman Deadly Legacy? I don't. I've never heard of this project. This was after my time. Maybe, it probably wasn't after my time. I just don't remember it. This might have been part. I don't think this was published as part of the regular DC Comics publishing schedule. I think this literally is a PSA comic. It would have been produced by the Special Projects division at DC Comics. The division, Paul Kupperberg ran that, and they would produce comics. If Six Flags Great Adventure needed a comic book. I mean, I wrote one for Six Flags. I wrote one for NASCAR and Kmart. Scott Beatty wrote a really funny one for one of the pharmaceutical companies. And you would get paid rate and a half because there were no royalties. And, they were fun little gigs to do on the side. And I think that's what this is, because it's translated into Bosnian and Croatian and everything else. And this was at the time of the whole kerfuffle going on with Serbia and Bosnia and all the little former principalities and dukedoms that were fighting it out in the 90s. And I think this is literally a cautionary tale featuring Superman. Where he's basically telling, hey, kids, look out for landmines, because, there were Soviet-made landmines apparently sprinkled across the entire landscape. Many of them are probably still there. And they're dangerous. You don't want to get near landmines because they're designed to kill you. Or at the very least, just take your legs off. Either prospect is not pleasing. But yeah, I think this was a literal PSA. So my opinion on it is it probably served the purpose. It might have helped educate some kids into not looking for landmines. I question why the kids look the way they do. They don't look very Eastern European here. They look like, American suburban kids, just back from soccer practice. But, whatever. The intention here was good, and I can't fault it. Now, one I can fault is Death of Innocence, the horror of landmines. And this was part of the regular schedule of DC Comics. And this was very politically oriented. There was a group wanting to ban landmines, that the United States would no longer use landmines and all the rest of it. It wasn't warning children about the dangers. It was talking about, the big bad meanies in the military. Killing innocent children and not giving a damn. I was the first one asked to write this because they knew I would do the homework on the military end of it. I said, no, I happen to like landmines. I mean, if I was a Marine or a Army Ranger on a forward operating base, I would love landmines because they're a force multiplier. And it would mean I could defend my position with fewer men. I could basically take portions of my defense perimeter and just put it off limits to the enemy because I laid mines there. And they said, well, don't you want to ban landmines? I said, well, no. And they said, but they stay in the ground for years and they kill children. I said, not American landmines. American landmines have a shelf life and they basically become inoperative after a certain amount of time. I said, if you really want to go after the bad guys, go after the Soviets and the Chinese. They make mines that will kill you 80 years later. They make mines that are so sturdy that they'll move under the earth if the earth shifts. This happened in Afghanistan a few times, and these things will move around, and they're sturdy enough that they don't become obsolete. They're still deadly. A horrifying story about a British unit in Afghanistan who ended up in what they called, very appropriately, the Valley of Death, where these hillsides that had been covered in Soviet and Russian-made landmines, there was a landslide that brought all the mines to the center of the valley. So this place was, no matter where you stepped, you would get blown up for like miles. And it's like, so I'm like, aren't they the guys you want to go after? I kind of like landmines. And the funny thing is the first artist they asked was Graham Nolan, and he gave them precisely the same answer I did. So it's like, our soldiers, they shouldn't use guns because they kill people. Sorry, it's war. That's the kind of the point of it. Generally, I don't like these political issue comics using, superhero characters and everything else, to carry any agenda. And I mean any agenda. I mean, I wouldn't even want Batman and Superman used in a politically driven comic that I agreed with their agenda. I wouldn't want a Superman comic about lowering taxes, a Batman comic about shrinking the government, because that's not the role of these characters. Even though I would agree with those comics and would probably have fun writing them, I'd still turn that job down because I don't agree with this. And even when it's something as inexcusable as like child trafficking and child abuse, I remember when this book, The Batman, The Ultimate Evil, it was plotted by Andrew Vox. Andrew Vox wrote a Batman novel. Andrew Vox solely wrote about child trafficking and child sexual abuse and stuff like that. And it was this total raison d'etre, which just between you and me, I found a little creepy. That's all this guy could ever talk about. And I remember the editor on this, and I can't remember who was editing this at the time, complained because they would ask Vox for help with stuff and everything else. And they had to make a lot of corrections because, Vox told them straight up, I don't give a crap about Batman. I just want to get my message out. And that's, to me, what's wrong with these kind of politically or issue motivated books. I'm not going to say child abuse is political. There's nothing political about it, but it is an issue. And I just think there's, I don't know, using these fantasy characters, these childhood wish fulfillment characters in these roles simply because they're famous and iconic. I just, you're kind of, I don't know, you're renting out their legacy. Keaton Kurji, why is it that so much of the time the cover art on a comic is so much better than what's actually inside? This even goes back to the Silver Age, where you could see so many great Kurt Swan illustrations on Superman in action, and look inside to find out it's a way lesser artist. Yeah, I fell for this a lot when I was a kid. You buy the comic and it's like, oh man, this cover is so cool. And then you get home. This is why at the drugstore, our local drugstore, I was excused by the druggist. I was allowed to look in the comics because he knew that I just wanted to see who drew it. I wasn't going to be taken in, although I was taken in by that Hulk annual. I looked at the art inside and it was pretty bad. And not because of the talent, because it was rushed. It was an obvious rush job. But boy, I wanted that cover. But we've all fallen for this. It's bait and switch. And why does the cover look better? Because they paid more for it. Covers paid more than a single page of a comic. And you would take your top artists, the ones that people really liked, that could do an attractive cover, who were the fad of the moment, and boom, put it on there because you had fans who were completists. They would buy anything by that artist. And on the newsstand, it would garner attention. Good art garners more attention than bad art. And so, you would be tempted to pick it up. And it's just a sales. It's just like enhanced covers and variants and all the rest of it. It's a money grab. But, what are you going to do? It's marketing. Thomas Pellegrino, what is your favorite Steve Ditko Spider-Man story? Also, even though Steve Ditko left Marvel on his own accord, do you think he would have been blacklisted by Stan Lee because of their budding political beliefs? My favorite, hands down, the one I enjoyed the most, enjoyed the whole run, was Spider-Man Annual 2, Spider-Man's first encounter with Doctor Strange. And I vividly recall, like it was yesterday, buying this at the newsstand at the corner near my grandmother's apartment, and then rushing home and reading it on her sofa. And just, I've read the story so many times, and I read this annual so many times the cover fell off. It was a disgrace. The comic was so well loved. Now, do I think that Stan Lee and Steve Ditko would have butted heads politically? No, Stan would never have blacklisted anybody for their political beliefs. And Steve's political beliefs, he was an Ayn Rand absolutist and may even gone beyond that. Um, um, his politics were peculiarly his own, and he didn't see them as politics. He saw them as a moral stance. He saw them as a life philosophy, and he would apparently talk to you about it, but he wouldn't always be a scold. He wouldn't be, he wouldn't turn into Mr. A and start, telling people what to do and why they were wrong, and wasn't judgmental in person. But if you got him in a political discussion, it was a free fire zone. This is my understanding. And but I doubt it ever came up between Stan and Steve. I doubt it ever came up very often. Um, you know, I don't think Steve Ditko was going around explaining his philosophy to everybody. Any more than I would go around explaining my political beliefs to people who didn't give a crap or didn't want to hear about it. Until a discussion starts, your opinion, then your opinions are invited. I would hope. Well, maybe not in today's atmosphere, but you would hope. But yeah, I don't see that. Stan Lee didn't have a political bone in his body. I don't think. Twin spin. Oh, hey, okay, here we go. Thomas Pellegrino again. During your run on Punisher Warzone, you worked with John Buscema from issue 26 to 30, and you worked with Joe Kubert from issue 31 to 36, two legends of the industry. Do you think Steve Ditko's art would have worked on a Punisher story arc in the same vein as those arcs written by yourself? It would have been interesting because the Buscema arc came along when Don Daly told me that Big John had time for a 3-issue arc. And so, if you've ever read the arc, I basically wrote him a Conan story in Punisher Drag. There's a lot of physical fighting in it. Most memorably, a fight in a sugarcane field. And so I was getting near the end of the arc, the 3rd issue, and Don calls and says, "Could you extend the story 2 more issues?" And maybe that's obvious when you read the arc. I don't know. He said because John's really enjoying it. And he's delaying his other project to do a full 5-issue arc, which was the standard on Punisher Warzone, if you remember correctly. The standard was 5-issue arcs, so each one could be a trade paperback. Same thing with Joe Kubert. Well, not exactly the same thing. Joe wanted to do Punisher. He specifically requested me as a writer, which made me impossible to live with for a few days. And then we collaborated on the story. I've told this before. I wanted to set the story in, hey, here comes the problems in Sarajevo again, the then current conflicts with Serbia and Bosnia Herzegovina and Kosovo and the rest. And I wanted to set it there because I knew Joe was Croatian, and I thought it would interest him. And he drew those kind of people and those kind of locations so well. And I also knew I wanted a lot of weather. I wanted a lot of rain and snow and stuff like that. And so I talked to Joe on the phone, and he said, "Well, before you tell me what you want to do," and then basically said what I said. He says, "I really want to set this in the conflict going on right now in Eastern Europe, and if you could, I really like drawing elements. So give me storms and stuff like that." So it's like, and all I could say was, "Okay, Joe, that's a great idea." So we were on the same page even before we knew there was a page. And so there was some deal of back and forth. He even sent me his thumbnails. And I mean the actual penciled thumbnails, so I could look at the issue before he began penciling. Not that I ever made any corrections. And this was a rarity. Joe did not share any kind of original art, even thumbnails. But I have all the thumbnails from a few of the issues of that arc, and I treasure them. Why wouldn't I? As far as a Ditko Punisher, I'd want to take the same approach. I'd be so intimidated because it's quite obvious from previous videos and this one that I idolized Ditko. boy, it would have been interesting to collaborate with him. I wouldn't simply write a story and hand it to him. I would want to talk to him. How do you view the Punisher as a character? I mean, he's close to your Mr. A character, but he's also amoral to a certain extent. I think Mr. A would kill Frank Castle. He would judge him as lacking in moral turpitude. He would look upon him as an animal. And I thought it would be interesting to have the Punisher engage another hero who was a moral absolutist in the model of Ayn Rand, and see what made that tick. See how that worked. Because knee jerk conventional wisdom would have you think that Steve Ditko would have loved the Punisher because he was killing criminals. He was judging them as killing them, and there were no gray areas with the Punisher. He was, all black and white. Well, that's how it looks to us. But I think to Steve Ditko, he would look at the Punisher as one huge gray area because of his methods and motivations. I'm sure Steve Ditko would have seen Frank Castle's motivations as primarily selfish because he's basically killing people as therapy. He's killing people to assuage his guilt. I don't know. These are all things. This is a fascinating question, and I thought a lot about it, obviously. But it would have been cool. I don't know how much Steve would have collaborated or whatever, but boy, I would have dug the experience. Even if no story ever came of it, even if at the end he says, "No, I can't do that," it would have been really cool to have those discussions with him. And also, he might have appreciated someone who, although they didn't entirely agree with him, wouldn't have minded writing a story reflecting his life philosophy. So, cool question. Very cool question. Billy Bob Joe Ray Cyrus. Well, how y'all been? Have you seen Batman Caped Crusader yet? If so, what do you think of it? Very interested to hear your 2 cents on this controversial new series from Bruce Timm and company, considering your connection to Batman the Animated Series back then. Some of your old colleagues like Ed Brubaker and Greg Rucka are involved in this series as well. Well, Ed and Greg being involved doesn't surprise me because, from what I hear, it's pretty woke. And so certainly something I wouldn't be invited to participate in. No, I haven't seen it because I don't know. I just don't have any interest. I love Batman and all the rest of it, but I watched the Batman the Animated Series because I was involved. There was a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of synergy between us and the animated guys. We were meeting them all the time. I mean, not formal meetings, but they were at the DC offices a lot, and we would run into them, and go out to lunch and spend time talking and geeking out over Batman and everything else, which was very reassuring to all of us that Batman was in good hands. I mean, we didn't want a bunch of, as we see too often today, people either indifferent or openly hostile to a franchise doing any kind of adaptations of it. That said, this is from all I've heard, woke. Changing the Penguin to a woman makes absolutely no sense. And Bruce Timm's justifications for it, that there aren't enough women in Batman's Rose Gallery, is highly suspect. You've got Catwoman, you've got Harley Quinn, you've got Poison Ivy. Catwoman and Harley Quinn in particular are two of the most popular Batman characters out there. And there are other female characters. I created plenty of female villains. Lady Spellbinder, Lady Vic. Wow, I use Lady a lot. I created a lot of female villains. And there were the Ravens, the trio that recurringly fought the Birds of Prey, which I didn't create all the Ravens. I created one of the Ravens. Anyway, there's a lot of female villains that they could have used. They did not have to transgender, and the Penguin particularly makes no sense because the Penguin, of all the Batman villains, here's the womanizer. Here's the charmer. And back when they were doing the second animated series, these guys fell in love with what I had done with the Penguin in Detective, which is I transformed the Penguin with Denny O'Neil's blessing into a sort of Sidney Greenstreet character, into a background kind of fixer character hanging around nightclub with hot chicks in his own nightclub, the Iceberg Lounge, and both Bruce Timm and Paul Dini, fell in love with the idea and made it part of the series, and eventually worked its way into the movies and everything else. But yeah, there's only one reason to do this, and it's wokeism. And as we know, we're kind of turning the corner on wokeism, but this series has probably been in development for years, and it was too late to go back and make a correction, a course correction. Richard Ware, do you plot a comic differently than a novel? If they are different approaches, is there an order you approach each by? Well, the basics don't change. You come up with a good idea, or I do anyway. This is how I do it. You come up with a basic concept, and then I think of my big scenes. There's these big, either dramatic scenes or action set pieces that I want to get to. And with a comic, it's easier because comics are broader. They're quicker to write. You're packing a lot of story into a very small space, both script-wise and on the page, on the actual comic book page. So, the big scene scenario works perfectly for comics because it's a visual medium. It doesn't take you as far when you're writing novels. I never do outlining with comics. I rarely do outlining with novels. I make notes. A couple of times I've made chapter outlines, like this happens in this chapter, this happens in this chapter, this happens. And within 3 chapters, I've abandoned it and I'm off on my own. I'm following the same general course for the story that I had thought of, but I'm leaving the outline behind because it was stifling. It was boring, quite frankly. Sometimes, it's weird because a writer's making it all up, but it's not whole in his mind or his or her mind. So a lot of times you surprise yourself. The story kind of begins to tell itself, but you have to be careful there too, because sometimes when a story begins to tell itself, you're like, there's something familiar about the story, and you realize, oh my God, I'm copying this other story, or I'm using elements from this other story. So you have to make sure that the flow of the story is coming, all from you. That's something to be concerned with. It's not as big a concern in comics because comics is collaborative. You've got an artist and there's a lot of different elements of a comic. There are things that delight about a comic, and many things that delight about a comic. And in a novel, only one thing delights: the story. So it's all on me as the writer. But yeah, my process is kind of willy-nilly making it up as I go along for the most part, beyond a general idea. Like I have a general idea of how I want the next Levon Cade novel to go, but I'm wrestling now with how to get into it. It has a more complex opening structure than any of the Levons I've done before. In other words, Levon doesn't come on stage in this next novel for a while. We're pretty far into the novel before Levon shows up. So there's a lot of setup, and I've never written a Levon Cade novel that way, but I'm looking forward to it because, as I've said before, I try to make each Levon Cade novel different. There's no formula, there's no format, there's no template. Each one is different in structure, different in tone. No, not really different in tone, but different in structure, different in what the MacGuffin is, different in what the suspense elements are, different in the general overall high concept. But these are all the things that keep me up at night and make me wake up early in the morning. But in comics, no. Comics, yeah, man, comics it's in my DNA. So God has blessed me with the ability to write stories in a sequence of static pictures. But novels are work. But work I enjoy. Twin spin. This might be your first one. Okay, Richard Ware again. Does story by and plot mean the same thing? And therefore, which separately accredited the person who scripts it is not the plotter, but the writer? Does the editor come up with the premise and pass it on? Is there a team like layouts, pencils, inkers, and colorists? The information I've seen about this process is vague. Yeah, editors don't come up with ideas. they might come up with an idea, and then the writer completely. Like, I've had this experience. Someone assigned me a story. They had come up with a concept, and I went so far off it that they paid me a kill fee and said, "Forget it. You can keep this story. I like it, but it's not what I wanted. It's not what I asked for." And I knew that. I knew when I completed it. It's like, wow, I went way off the reservation on this. I took his original concept and went in an entirely different direction. And we parted. Well, we haven't even parted, but we agreed to disagree. We're still friends, and we're still going to work together. It's just every once in a while, I go nuts. But yeah, editors in the comic, beware of an editor who wants to give you story ideas, because they want to write the book, not you. Now, is it a collaborative effort? Yes, it's a collaborative effort with everybody. You're ideally in the comic book process. If you're the writer, you're going to be in contact with everybody, even the letterer. A lot of stuff I'm packaging myself, financing myself through your generous contributions at Subscribestar, and so I'm in contact with everybody in every aspect of putting a comic together. So yeah, it's a big collaborative, love fest. Now, plot and story, in my mind, are two different things. Plot is the overall concept. LA cop visiting his wife on Christmas gets trapped in a high-rise office building with a bunch of terrorists. That's the concept. Well, now you got to write the story. And that, as we know, that story can go good or it can go bad, depending on the talent and dedication of the writer. Give you an example. Concept. State cop pulls over a guy for speeding, and it turns out his wife isn't very talented at lovemaking. Okay, there's your concept. State trooper, couple speeding, wife's not very good in bed. That's the plot. That's the concept. Not terribly engaging. Okay. Well, here's the story. State cop pulls a couple over for speeding. And the state cop comes up and says, I guess you know what you did. And the guy says, no. And the wife goes, what did he say? What did he say? And the husband says, he says, I guess you know what you did. Right? And the cop says, you were speeding. The wife says, what did he say? What did he say? And the guy says, he says, did I know I was speeding? And the cop says, I need to see your driver's license and your registration. The wife says, what did he say? What did he say? Husband says, he wants to see my driver's license and registration. So the cop's looking at the driver's license and he says, you're from Scranton, Pennsylvania. I had the worst sexual experience of my life in that town. The wife says, what did he say? What did he say? And the husband says, he thinks he knows you. That's the difference between plot and story. I move on. Triple spin. Richard Ware knocking it out of the park, makes it to third base. I've seen different writers' sample scripts, and there is a fairly wide variety of formats used. Is the format important or just communicating a story? Are there some elements that must be done in a certain way while others are left more to each writer? Or as the writer gains more recognition, can they eschew what they like in the formatting? I've used the same format forever. Here it is. Panel 3, or page 3, panel 1, panel description, then the dialogue. Panel 2, repeat panel, which means you repeat panel 1. Whatever. This format, to me, is the most elegant comic format, and it was given to me by Bob Kanigher. Bob Kanigher, extremely prolific writer for DC Comics, gave me a Sergeant Rock script, or maybe it was a Loser script, and I studied it because I'd never seen a comic script before. I had no idea how comics were written. This was sometime in the 70s. And I thought, wow, this works because it's very clear it breaks down everybody's job, okay? The page is described, the art is described, the artist is told what needs to be in each panel, and the letterer is told what needs to be in each balloon and what sound effect we're using or whatever. It's like it's all there. You can see the page in your head. And I thought this was the most elegant format. Now, I've seen people use other formats. This is what I've used forever. I've never varied from this script writing format. Now, I've seen others, and I've seen people that get taught how to comic write and everything else, and there's this really complex format that doesn't seem very clear. I mean, and is it just me? Look at this format. This is perfect. Why would you change it? And artists and letterers love this format. I just realized I misspelled ombre in panel 2. Anyway, so why would you change it? I've seen really complex ones. I've seen scripts that I had a comic book script. I had a difficult time reading because, like, where am I? Is this a panel? Is this what am I reading? And things like having the dialogue in upper and lower case. Well, it's not going to be that way for the letterer. It's not going to be that way in a comic. Why would you upper and lower case? Because then you don't know how to emphasize each word. And you want to put in those emphasize words in bold, and making the lettering larger. I mean, if I want large lettering, if I want somebody shouting, I'll make the lettering a little larger, so it's very clear to the letterer that this lettering should be larger, or smaller. Someone's whispering or whatever. So this, to me, is the sturdiest format going. I don't know why anybody would use any other format, and yet I rarely see this one used. I know I'm not the only one using it, but I don't think the majority of comic book writers use this format. Joshua Ignatowski, do you have a story of a time when you learned about a science or history fact that significantly either affected or inspired something you wrote? When I was 10 years old, I was homesick and from school, and I saw this documentary on CBS about Stonehenge. And people say that blew my mind. This blew my mind. Literally blew my 11-year-old mind. I was like, what? And it started like this. I swear it turned on different parts of my brain. Parts of my brain that had been idle since birth lit up. And I became absolutely obsessed and fascinated and absorbed with the unwritten prehistory of man. What don't we know about man? And in this special, they had a correspondent. He was out on the Bonneville Salt Flats, and he was out there to demonstrate something. And he said, imagine that where I'm standing is today. And imagine those mountains in the distance. And they were in the distance on the other side of the Bonneville Salt Flats. This purple haze along the horizon. He says, imagine that's the beginning of mankind on Earth. And he goes, I'm going to walk toward those mountains, and I'm going to stop at what would be symbolically our known written history. And he took 2 steps. Mind blown again. Like, what? And then started talking about Stonehenge and the significance and what they had determined Stonehenge was, and the decoding and the complexity of just this circle of stones, and what it probably meant to the people. It just absolutely blew me away. When I got better and got back to school, I went to our 5th grade teacher because we had a timeline that ran around just under the ceiling of our classroom. Our teacher was a big history nut, and she had put this timeline. And whenever we learned something in history, she would put a 3x5 card. She would have one of the students write a 3x5 card and pin it on the timeline to where it happened. And I told her about this, and then she said, I want you to tell the class. So I told the class about it, and then she said, write out that 3x5 card, and they had to extend the timeline back further. I was so proud. But this started a lifelong fascination, a lifelong imagination exercise in my head about what was the world like before written history. And I read everything I could on it, and I still read everything I can on it. And if you've read my Bad Time series, you know my level of fascination for this period. And when I run into Conan, Robert E. Howard's Conan, a few years later, and it's like, whoa, it's set. Conan is set like pre-Ice Age. It's like he's in this period that I'm fascinated with, which just deepened my obsession with everything Conan. So there you go. Probably more of an answer than you were looking for. Twin spin for Joshua Ignatowski. Joshua again. Which characters from The Hobbit and or Lord of the Rings do you relate to and why? Bjorn. It's Bjorn all frickin' day long, and why wouldn't it be? He lives in this cool cabin in the woods. Nobody messes with him. He's a badass, and at night he turns into a bear. He's a werebear. Is there anything cooler than a werebear? And I fell in love with the character when I read The Hobbit, and and it saddened me when I adapted The Hobbit into comic book form that there was simply no room for Bjorn. As cool as the chapters with Bjorn were, they really didn't advance the story and didn't impact the story in any way. So I had to trim them, which was hard to do. But yeah, Bjorn, hands down, nobody comes close in my mind in the Middle Earth Tolkien universe to a werebear. Triple spin now with 10% more Ignatowski. Joshua's back with, do you estimate that it transpires that it moderately, recurrently, potboiler penmen and literati alike both utilize methods in their writing that befit them the epithets of being loquacious personages which effectuate circumlocution? Oh yeah, all day long. I think what you're asking is there guys that use a lot of big words and archaic phrasing and a lot of words generally to up their profile, up their place in the world of writing. And yeah, there's comic book writers. I think they thought they were being paid by the word, not by the page, and I think they thought more words were better. I think some of them wanted to cover up as much artwork as possible, and my entire career has been a reaction to these kind of comics. Early 70s, particularly. Outside of the DC War and Western comics and the Warren books, like every superhero book was just people yappity, 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 yap. There were very few people. I mean, you had Bernie Wrightson, you had Jim Starlin, you had a few others, and Alex Toth always, who still were trying to tell stories cinematically, trying to tell stories through pictures rather than words. But for the most part, a lot of writers, Archie Goodwin excused, were just piling on the words. And that's not comics. So, yes. To your question. One more thing. Okay, the Alien franchise. It's a new Alien movie out. I've got a lot of what are seen by many fans as controversial opinions about the Alien series. But in any case, I saw Alien when it opened, saw it opening weekend, blown away. Thought it was a fantastic movie. Still think it's a fantastic movie. Still rewatch it. Still amazed that they ever got this film made and how wonderfully crafted it is. And but it is, as they described it in the pitches, it's a haunted house in space. It's a spooky spaceship with a creepy, dangerous monster in it. Now it's much more than that, but at the heart of it, that's what it is, and that's fine because you're introducing this critter and you're introducing this life form and its evolution, its gestation, and all the rest of it. It's all very complex, which just made the movie fascinating. And you throw in Ian Holm as a robot and blah, 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 blah. And you got a great movie, got an awesome movie. Beautifully made with love, made with zero contempt for the genre. Surprising, because Ridley Scott wasn't a science fiction fan up to this point, wasn't a horror movie fan by any means. And so you get this fantastic movie that is justifiably a classic and justifiably rewatched and re-released over and over and over again for the enjoyment of millions. Now we move on to Aliens, and Aliens I'm a little kinder to now. The recent 4K restoration, just freaking amazing. The most amazing restoration I've seen of any movie ever. This was shot on the crappiest film stock you can possibly imagine, and the restoration fixes all of the problems caused by the inferior run of Kodak film stock. Now, I have some problems with Aliens. I have less now. I'm more forgiving now. But what is it? It's a haunted house in space. it's a slasher movie. Now, James Cameron advances the story by showing the military reactions and everything else, but he also, more importantly, expands the world. And he expands the world using one line of dialogue or one exchange where one of the characters says, so it's a bug hunt. And they're all a bug hunt. Okay, now we're told that these colonial Marines have hunted xenomorphs before. Now, none as clever and dangerous and ruthless and just plain man-killing machines like the aliens in the movie, but they have hunted xenomorphs before. And this raises all kinds of questions. You know, certainly in my mind, certainly in yours. You know, what were these things like? Okay, what was that like? And and it also makes you think, well, these guys are experienced. So it expands the world, even though it's still a haunted house in space. It's still a slasher film with an alien as the slasher. Alien 3, we move on, and I know people don't like Alien 3. I like Alien 3. I'm sorry. But Alien 3, once again, sort of advances and expands the world, expands the possibilities, because it reveals that the final version of the alien is reflective of its host. So this alien, because its host was a dog, is more dog-like. It has different physical features. It doesn't just turn into the same monster we saw in the other alien films. And it makes you wonder, well, geez, if the host was small, would the alien be smaller? The host, it raises the same possibilities as, is this a bug hunt? That there's a greater universe, that there's more to this. And it sort of promises that more of this will be explored. Now we get to Alien Resurrection, and we find that there's a beginning of experimentation. There's a beginning on the part of Weyland-Yutani to understand what these creatures are, how to keep them captive, how to hopefully weaponize them, to train them to do things that we want them to do, because they're virtually indestructible. They would be a nightmare used as a weapon. And so they're looking at, how to thwart them, how to control them, how to contain them. And of course, because, and this is sort of introduced in Alien Resurrection, that each new generation of alien creatures knows what the previous generation knew. So each generation becomes more experienced, more smart, more intelligent, more aware of its surroundings. And so there's no way to keep these things captive, because each new generation is going to be smarter than the last, and they're going to figure a way out of however you're containing them. It just makes them more dangerous. But and expand, whether you love this movie or hate this movie, it does expand the universe, and it shows the effort of Weyland-Yutani to deal with these creatures in a logistical way. But in the end, what is it? Haunted house in space. It's a slasher movie. There's nothing wrong with that. And then we get to the more recent iterations. Let's forget, and again, it's a whole planet, but the planet is a haunted house in space. And it's a slasher film. Who's going to die next? And the dumbest thing in the world is they introduced Noomi Rapace as a character who would have been a fine replacement for Sigourney Weaver. An actress with some depth, an actress who can really sell a part like this the way Sigourney Weaver could. And then they kill her they kill her between movies. It's like, wow, why would you throw away Noomi Rapace, the most abused woman in cinema history? Especially after, she gives herself a cesarean section. So why would you throw a character away like that? Anyway, these two movies are a mess. They're beautiful, but they're a mess, and they really do nothing to advance anything except to inform you that Weyland-Yutani is just as dumb now as they've ever been. Whoops, a little too early. They're just as, they haven't learned anything. There's been all these years have passed, and they still don't know how to control these things. There's still no real effort made to weaponize them, to monetize them, whatever plan Weyland Yutani had for these critters and why they wanted to keep them alive and why they wanted to breed them. And we really learned nothing, and we learned nothing about the past. The background stories for these characters are just moronic. You know, the bald-headed giants who apparently were all men, who created these things or found them, or whatever. It's all so confusing and forgettable that it's a pain. And now we get to the most recent one, Alien Romulus, and what is it? It's a haunted house in space, with a cast featuring no grown-ups. And I've heard it's terrible. I've heard it's okay. I haven't seen it, but one thing I can tell you is it's a slasher movie, and this time with actual teenagers, or young adults who look young enough to be teenagers. And so we really, over all these movies, and I've lost count of how many there are, there's no advancement. There's no, hey, let's break the formula and do something else. Let's explore this world a little bit more. You keep talking about weaponizing aliens. Why don't you do an alien war movie? Get out of the slasher movie thing and do an alien war movie. Who would they set these things against? Are there other xenomorphs that the human race wants out of the way, or can simply experiment on? Introduce a bunch of these aliens into their population, into their ecology, and see what happens. That'd be a hell of a movie. And there's, and if you make alien movies with a military bent or a war bent or a geopolitical bent, you've opened the door to all kinds of stories, adventure stories as opposed to horror stories, war action stories, as opposed to just doing slasher films. And of course, you've always got the horror element. These creatures are still going to be dangerous. But I'd love to see a movie where they weaponize the aliens, and obviously the aliens figure out a way to, turn the tables on their, supposed masters. Why don't they do this? Has anybody done this? It's always the same thing over and over and over again. But of course, that's Hollywood. That is Hollywood. Hey, while I got you, The Horseman. I'm not sure when this video is going to drop. The Horseman may be already being solicited. It's a new project from the Rippaverse by me and Joe Bennett. Vigilante Justice, done by me and Joe Bennett. Action with hero and characters that I promise you'll care about. You'll love them. And I've already written the sequel, and I think Joe started working on it this week. So there you go. Hey, if you want to contact me, brunobookstore@gmail.com, brunobookstore@gmail.com, with your suggestions, pictures of your kitties and your doggies, and the rest of it. And that's where you'll find me. So anyway, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking. Thanks for subscribing if you did. Personally, I'm over the whole subscription thing. YouTube is never going to let me get to 10,000 subscribers. It's pretty obvious. They keep pulling me back. So I don't care. We're all friends here. We've all known each other a while, virtually, digitally. And I'm perfectly happy talking to this group every week. If it gets larger, it gets larger, but I really don't care. We're all having fun here, right? So who needs more friends? Anyway, that's it for me, and I hope to see all of you down the road.